Hello, I'm Sharifa George, Public Relations Coordinator of the Antigua Public Utilities Authority, and welcome to Necessary Conversations with APUA. Here is where we have topical discussions about matters that impact you, our customers. Right now, Antigua and Barbuda is in the transitionary period between the wet and dry season. During this time, we will eventually begin to reduce production at the largest natural water catchment utilized by the Antigua Public Utilities Authority. Today, we will be having a very necessary conversation about Potworks Dam and its maintenance. And joining us is Water Business Unit Manager, Mr. Ian Lewis. Welcome, Mr. Lewis, to Necessary Conversations with APUA.
Thank you, Sharifa.
It's nice to have you. How are you?
Nice to be here.
Good. So, it's customary for when we have a new guest, we like to ask them to share with us a story, something that happened that's memorable in their career, anything at all. So, what's your story, Mr. Lewis?
Okay, Sharifa, I actually came from the Electricity Business Unit in 2007 to the Water Business Unit when the Water Business Unit was earmarking for the first time on desalination. There was already desalination within electricity, but that plant at Tango was closed. So water started its journey on desalination using reverse osmosis in 2007. When I came, I was in charge of that single plant. That plant was a production of about 600,000 gallons per day. And since then, for the last 10 years, we have been increasing that production. And I can say today we're somewhere in the region of about 8 to 10 million gallons per day.
That's great.
And I think that's a pretty good accomplishment.
It is. So 2007, that's somewhere around the beginning of our most intense drought period.
It was one of the peak periods for drought.
Water wars essentially isn't anything new to Antigua and Barbuda. Drought isn't anything new. And I recall last year we were speaking about our short, medium, and long-term objectives to pretty much get over our challenges with water production and distribution. So could you give us an update on where we are with our medium and long-term objectives?
Okay, the medium-term objectives were essentially to get up as quickly as possible 2 new desalination plants at Fry's Beach and one at Fort James. That plant at Fry's Beach, built by the Japanese, is on island, and we're presently doing outside of the installation, which is the pipe works, the pump station, and the electricals required for that plant. Of course, due to COVID, there has been a delay in the engineers coming out of Japan to have that plant set up. On the Fort James plant, which will produce 500,000 gallons per day, APUA has just completed the last payment to Waterworks. So now Waterworks would be in a position to start buying the last items required for that plant before it's shipped out to us here. And for that, we are estimating to have that plant here in 2 to 3 months. So once that plant is here, we have already pre-ordered most of the items, the auxiliaries, and we should start work on that probably within the next 6 or 8 weeks.
Okay, great. So let's talk about Potworks Dam. We know Potworks Dam collects water from areas across the island, well, some portions of the island. Could you share with us what areas those are?
Okay, Potworks Reservoir, and probably now is a good time to use a technical term. All a dam is just a wall that prevents water from flowing. So we talk about the Potworks Reservoir, which is the area of water that holds water. The dam wall is that road that you see going by the pump station. So the correct term would be a reservoir. So it's the Potworks Reservoir.
Potworks Reservoir.
And the Potworks Reservoir is located within the Potworks watershed. And by watershed, we talk about the area that all rainfall and runoff collected flows into that area. So the Potworks watershed will extend as far as Liberta and some parts of All Saints and Buckley's. Water captured there and runoff will end up in Potworks if there's enough rainfall to have runoff. So it's a wide area and it's our biggest watershed. In fact, Antigua has 13 watersheds. Our next most important watershed is within the Benders Valley. So we consider Potworks and the Benders Valley as our most important watersheds out of the 13.
Okay, so when Potworks is at full capacity, how much do you think it can hold?
Potworks at full capacity holds about 1 billion gallons of water, and that's about 1,000 million. And at maximum production, which would be just about 2 million gallons per day, it should last for about 1 year or 12 months. There's also the factor that there's considerable amount of evaporation in Potworks since it spans an area of 500 acres. We lose about 1 million gallons per day just having water sitting there, and the natural geological effects, we lose about 1 million gallons per day. So whether we pump or not, we're losing about 1 million gallons per day.
When was the last time Potworks was full to capacity?
From my recollection, I think Potworks was full in 2010, and that would have been at the passage of either was a tropical storm or a very minor hurricane by the name of Gonzales. And Potworks had got to 25 feet that particular year in 2010.
It's quite some time ago, though, just about 11 years.
Yeah.
So sometimes we get some questions about the expansion of Potworks Dam, making it bigger so it can hold more water. Has a study ever been done to determine if Potworks Dam can be expanded?
Yes, there have been many studies done within the Water Business Unit looking at the possible expansion of Potworks. The most recent investigation we had done was about 2 years ago, which was done by some Cuban engineers who were here looking at two aspects. One would be the expansion of our surface water catchment areas, and the second one was mapping and trying to quantify the amount of groundwater we had. For the expansion, when they looked at Potworks, because Potworks is a very shallow area, the only possible expansion would be excavating lower than where it is. And there were major concerns in doing that, in that Antigua has three types of soil. There's volcanic, there's limestone, and there's clay. And somewhere in that region of Potworks, there is a changeover from clay to limestone. And what the engineers are saying is that you don't want to excavate and you go through the limestone layer, because limestone does not hold water. So if you go through the limestone layer, it means that Potworks will end up leaking. And since Potworks is that at a low elevation, there's possibly seawater on the Potworks, because what we also notice is as the quantity of water gets low and low in Potworks, it begins to become salty, which means that there is some kind of transfer between the layers with seawater. So it's something that we really don't want to do.
So basically, digging any deeper into Potworks Dam can pretty much compromise the integrity and the quality of water.
It'll compromise the integrity and quality, and we'll probably have to change our operations from treating what we call surface water to probably going into another form of desalination.
Which I imagine would be at the expense of the authority, because now you pretty much have to change over the technology used
Yes.
to treat the water.
And what that also does in a negative way is that a lot of farmers who take water from that area would end up with salt water.
We hear talks about there being a layer of silt in the Potworks Dam. Is that so?
That is not entirely true, and maybe if I go into a bit of science, I can explain. We spoke about the watershed reaching as far as All Saints and Buckley's, and looking at the slope, it's a very gentle slope, and water flows quicker from higher elevations. And in that quick flow, it would have a tendency to carry particles along, and in the terms of particles would be silt. Since the elevation is so gentle, the flow of water within the Potworks watershed is very slow. So therefore, rain will come and it'll take 2 days to get into the Potworks reservoir. Shows you how slow the rate is. Therefore, any particles that it would have picked up along the way would have settled out before getting into what we call a pool area. From time to time, when the water level goes below extraction and we have a chance to examine the dam, we can still see some of the old furrows of the cultivated land that was there, I think before 1969 when the dam was created. We can still see the old concrete road. You can drive on it. There's no silt on that road. So since there's no silt on the road, it would indicate that the dam has very little silt. So it's not something that really gives us concern.
Okay, so I want to add here a point of clarification. What is an aquifer, and does Potworks have one?
In layman's term, an aquifer is basically an underground containment of water. And normally the term aquifer is used for groundwater where you're looking to drill wells. You drill a hole in the ground with a drill rig, and you'll get to a level where you can find water that's stored on the ground. That's typically what an aquifer is. Potworks does not have an aquifer beneath it. What we're surmising is that there's probably salty water on the Potworks. We have some wells within the area called Collins, and we're noticing what we call seawater intrusion. Those wells are beginning to get salty, and they're beginning to get salty because of the seawater that is coming into them. And that's pretty close to Potworks. So that will tell you that it's a very good possibility that below Potworks, if you dig deep enough, you'll probably find salt water.
But the salt water that's coming into the wells, is it because of natural causes, or is it that we've exhausted the use of these wells? What could contribute to that?
Okay, basically when you explore a well, one of the determining factors is to extract water sustainably. And by that we mean just pump enough so that you can have a very long extended pumping schedule. If you pump too much, you're going to pump out the fresh water, and seawater or brackish water will replace that. So basically what you're seeing as the well is getting more salty is due to the fact that you are extracting most of the surface water, fresh water, and seawater is not replacing that. So yes, you can overpump a well, and when you do that, sometimes it takes decades to get back to freshness.
So if we're looking at Potworks Dam right now, as water depletes, you're going to see more shrubbery. Sometimes trees reaching as high as maybe 5 feet or so, maybe even more. And the question is, does this affect the supply of water? How does this affect the amount of water you can collect in the dam or the reservoir? And what does it have to do? How does it affect the treatment of water with this material decaying over time?
Okay, the material that grows in Potworks, the shrubbery, it's a natural phenomenon. As it gets dry, of course, bush will grow and brush will grow. It does not affect the volume that Potworks holds. Because once the water comes in, that does not affect the volume. But what it does affect is our treatment regime. Once water gets in, those plants start to die, and it affects what we call our organic load. And therefore, the chemicals that we use to treat the water, we have to select these chemicals very carefully. Because if we do not select these chemicals carefully, the water can become very difficult to treat. And our water is treated to World Health Organization standards, WHO. And we look at certain parameters like the turbidity. We look at parameters like conductivity, and these organic materials will contribute to that and also make the treatment difficult. Yes, they do not affect the quantity, but they have some effect on the treatment regime. And we do have chemicals that deal with that. So the consumer really does not see the difference between when the dam is newly replenished, where you have organic material dying, and when most of it has died, let's say months after, and there's no organic material left. We're able to treat effectively those conditions.
So would there be any value to rid the dam of shrubbery or any trees prior to an expected period of heavy rainfall?
What we normally do is a cost-benefit analysis. And we look at what it's going to cost us to, let's say, chop and remove 1 acre of shrubbery versus the chemical costs. And we have done that. In most of the situations, it's a lot cheaper to just change the chemical you're using for treatment than to have the product removed.
Okay, and the chemicals and the more aggressive treatment would have to do to the water. That does not affect the quality to the point where it's detrimental to health of the consumers.
No, because we're treating to a particular standard. And I must also state that all of the chemicals that we use to treat the water are what's called NSF approved, which is National Sanitation Foundation, which is an organization within the U.S. that certifies chemicals for drinking water. So the chemicals we use, they're safe, and we don't exceed the quantities recommended. So the water is pretty safe to drink.
Mr. Lewis, earlier we spoke about dredging the Potworks Dam could cause a leak. This suggests that there's a leak that's possible underneath, but what about the other leak that we've heard about with regards to Potworks Dam? We've heard about a leak in a wall, a leak in a slipway. Could you clarify that for us?
Okay, presently, Potworks Dam has a leak in the spillway. And basically what a spillway is, it's an engineered design area that allows the overflow to leave. So Potworks Dam has walls around the side, and this particular spillway is at a particular elevation that when the dam gets to full, the excess water will overflow and be directed in a particular area that's safe for it to go. And this spillway is located on the, you could call the south side of the dam, and that water will run from the dam, let's say, back to the Bethesda Sea area.
So, would it be any value to repair that spillway? Is it possible?
Yes, we have looked at the repair of the spillway. In fact, in the past, we had asked a few agencies, we had asked, I believe, the Venezuelans, we had asked the Chinese to look at it in terms of grant funding to have it done. But based on, let's say, our priority list at this point in time, that's not at the top. We're more gearing towards desalination, because what we do realize is even if we expand Potworks, because of the present rainfall patterns, Potworks does not get enough water on a yearly basis. So spending money to increase the capacity and not knowing if rain will fall or not would be something that would have to be seriously looked at.
There's a bit of uncertainty there.
There's a lot of uncertainty whether you'd want to spend money. Wouldn't that money be better spent on buying desalination plants?
Which is more guaranteed.
That's what we're saying, because we need a more reliable and dependable source.
So, which leads me to my next question. Has the dam ever been filled enough to reach to that, what you call it, slipway?
The spillway.
The spillway point?
Spillway. The dam has gotten to the spillway back in 2010, when it was high enough that it was overflowing at the spillway, and then a couple feet below the full level where we have the leak, it was flowing. So at that point in time, we were trying to extract as much water as possible, so we'd get below the level where the leak was, and then we could back off on production.
Okay, so right now the spillway isn't a major concern.
The spillway is not a factor, because the rain that we got last year that took the dam to, I believe, 15 or 16 feet, did not even get up to the level of the spillway. And that would have been about 50% of the capacity.
It sounds as though the Water Business Unit is making a very strategic and wise decision to move to more consistent and reliable methods with reverse osmosis. And I hope with this interview, though, we've shed a lot more light on the maintenance and all the questions that we've received over the years as it relates to Potworks Dam. So I want to thank you, Mr. Lewis, for that. So this brings us to the end of this episode of Necessary Conversations with APUA, and this also brings us to the end of Season 1. If you've missed any of the episodes, feel free to visit our Facebook page or YouTube channel to get up to date. And until Season 2, on behalf of my guests, my team, the Corporate Communications Department, and APUA, it has been our pleasure bringing to you these very important conversations. So until next time, stay safe and bye-bye.